In our small neighborhood, there was a man who stood apart from everyone else. He wasn't just different, he was unsettling. We called him the Dark Man. No one knew his real name and no one dared to ask. He was tall, slender, and always clad in a pitch-black coat that billowed around him like the night itself. His face was perpetually hidden behind an assortment of masks, each one more grotesque than the last. Sometimes he wore a smooth porcelain mask with hollowed-out eyes, other times a cracked, wooden one with exaggerated features. But it didn't matter which mask he wore. His eyes were always hidden behind thick, dark lenses, making it impossible to tell where he was looking. Despite his eerie appearance, people were drawn to him, especially the kids. They admired him. The mystery of his silence, his strange masks, and his unwavering calm in the face of anything frightening turned him into a sort of legend among them. "He's fearless," they'd say, daring each other to approach his house to follow him on his walks into the woods. Even the adults couldn't help but feel a strange respect. No one ever saw him flinch, not even during the wildest storms that battered the town. If anyone could conquer fear, it was him. Every day, without fail, he walked into the forest that bordered the town, disappearing into the thick trees for hours. Sometimes he came back at dusk, other times well after midnight. The forest had a reputation. Strange things had happened there. People had gone missing, animals found with deep gashes in their bodies, gutted like prey. But the Dark Man? He never seemed to care. Whatever lurked in those trees, it didn't scare him. Or so we all thought. Then one evening something changed. It was late summer when he set out again for his usual walk into the woods. The sky had turned an angry shade of red as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, sinister shadows that seemed to swallow the town whole. That night something felt off. The forest itself seemed different. He sensed it the moment he stepped under the canopy of trees. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of rotting wood and something else, something metallic like blood. The birds, usually so lively, had gone silent, and the wind that normally rustled the leaves was absent. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. As he ventured deeper, the ground beneath his feet began to feel soft, like he was walking on something alive. His black boots sunk slightly into the earth with each step, as though the ground was trying to pull him down. He ignored it, pressing further into the darkness, but that growing tension in the air clung to him like a second skin. For the first time in years he hesitated. Ahead, in a small clearing, he saw something that made him stop entirely. It wasn't the clearing itself. That was familiar. It was what stood in the center of it. A massive tree, one he had passed countless times before, had changed. Its bark was now blackened, twisted, and gnarled, as though it had been scorched from within. And hanging from the branches were dozens of objects. At first he thought they were fruit, dark and round, but as he moved closer, the horrible truth revealed itself. Masks. The same masks he wore. They swayed gently in the still air, each one staring back at him with hollow, lifeless eyes. Some were pristine while others were shattered, the wood splintered and cracked. But that wasn't the worst part. Underneath each mask, something pulsed. Flesh. The masks were not just hanging there, they were growing out of the tree, merging with the bark like tumors. A cold chill ran down his spine, something he hadn't felt in years. Fear. Real, palpable fear. The air around him thickened and he could hear whispers, faint at first but growing louder with every breath he took. "He's seen it," they hissed. "He knows now. He can't hide." Without thinking, he turned on his heel, his boots slipping in the soft earth as he tried to run. The forest, however, wasn't letting him go. The trees seemed to close in around him, their branches twisting and clawing at his coat, trying to drag him back. The whispers followed, growing louder and more frantic, mocking him. "Run, run all you want. But it won't change anything." And then, for the first time, the Dark Man felt it, the icy fingers of fear wrapping around his heart. He wasn't alone in the forest anymore. The Dark Man stumbled as he ran, his breathing shallow, his mind racing with the echoes of the whispers. He didn't know what he had seen back in the clearing, and he didn't care to understand. He just knew that it was wrong. Everything about that forest had turned from familiar to grotesque, from his sanctuary to a nightmare. But suddenly, after what felt like hours of fleeing, he stopped. The sounds, the whispers, the crackling of the twisted branches, the strange sensation of the ground pulling him down, vanished. The air lightened. It was as if none of it had ever happened. He looked around and found himself standing on the forest path again, the trees still and calm as they had always been. His pulse slowed, but a deep unease gnawed at him. The forest may have appeared normal again, but something inside him had shifted. He felt a weight in his chest, an unfamiliar sensation like something rotten growing within him. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see the gnarled tree and the masks again, but they were gone. Just dense trees and underbrush now, stretching out into the night. Trying to shake off the unease, he started walking back into the forest, as though drawn deeper by something invisible. It was quieter than usual, too quiet. His footfalls were the only sound. No animals scurried in the underbrush, no wind rustled the leaves. The silence pressed against his ears, and with each step, the weight inside him grew. It was like something dark was festering just beneath his skin, a presence that wasn't there before. He tried to focus on getting home, on putting distance between himself and that twisted clearing, but the forest path seemed to stretch endlessly. Every turn, every shadow, seemed to distort and pull him in. And then, through the veil of trees, he saw something ahead. A figure. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, his tired mind playing games with him. But as he drew closer, the figure became clearer. It was standing in the middle of the path, its back to him. Tall, lean, draped in black. He squinted, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. His heart skipped a beat. The figure, it looked exactly like him. The same black coat, the same unsettling posture. Even the mask. He stopped in his tracks, his mind spinning. Was it a reflection? An illusion? But how could that be? There was no mirror, no glass. Just trees and darkness. And yet, there it was, himself standing ahead, motionless. Against every instinct, he stepped forward, driven by a sick curiosity. He had to know. He had to see. The closer he got, the more he realized something was wrong with this reflection. The body was his, yes, but something was off. The coat clung too tightly to the figure's frame, as though it wasn't fabric but skin. The mask wasn't sitting on the face, it was fused like bone. And from the edges of the mask, something dark and oily dripped onto the ground, forming small pools that hissed and steamed in the dirt. As he drew within arm's length of the figure, it suddenly turned to face him. He froze. His mask stared back at him. But the eyes behind it, they weren't his. They were hollow, black voids, endless in their depth. And yet, somehow they saw everything. He could feel them looking into him, through him, like a predator analyzing its prey. The sensation of being hunted was overwhelming. Every instinct screamed for him to run, to leave this thing behind and never look back. But before he could react, the figure moved. And it moved in a way that defied everything natural. 1 second it stood still, the next it was on him. A blur of black, faster than any human could move. The impact hit him like a freight train. He had no time to brace himself, no time to react. It was as if the air itself had shattered around him. The force knocked him to his knees, his palms slamming into the wet, cold earth beneath him. He gasped for breath, his chest heaving, but no air seemed to come. The figure, his double, loomed over him, staring down with those empty black eyes. It was as though the thing had stolen the very life from him with a single blow. Sweat poured down his face, mixing with the dirt as he knelt there, powerless. His muscles felt like lead, his limbs too heavy to move. He could feel the ground beneath him pulse, as though it were alive, as though it was waiting for him to collapse entirely, to claim him. The figure tilted its head as if studying him, then it whispered in a voice that was somehow both his and something far darker. "You cannot leave." It didn't have to say anything else. The words echoed inside his skull like a curse, like a promise. This was no longer a forest, it was a cage. And he was trapped. The sun rose the next morning, casting a golden light over the quiet neighborhood. The air was still, unusually heavy, and the streets seemed deserted. Only one boy, the youngest of the children who idolized the dark man, dared to walk outside. He had been waiting eagerly, as he did every morning, to see the man emerge from the woods like he always did after his night walks. But today the man didn't come. Instead, the boy saw something else. Something that made his blood run cold. In the distance, near the edge of the forest, a figure appeared. At first, it looked like the dark man, the black coat, the mask, the eerie stillness. But as the figure drew closer, the boy realized with mounting horror that this wasn't the same man. This was something else. The figure moved wrong. It walked, but each step was too deliberate, too sharp, as if it was mimicking human movement rather than performing it naturally. Its head snapped from side to side as it scanned the street, and even from a distance, the boy could feel it, the suffocating pressure in the air, the cold dread that clung to him. The boy backed away, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. "He's not coming back," he whispered, shaking his head. "He's not coming back," but something else did. By now, the entire neighborhood had come outside, drawn by the strange feeling in the air. One by one, they saw the figure, and a collective shiver ran through them. No one spoke. No one dared move. They just watched in paralyzed terror as the figure slowly made its way down the street. Something was horribly wrong and they all knew it. It wasn't just the way the figure moved or the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to cling to the very air around it. It was the realization that whatever this thing was, it wasn't human. It wore the face of the dark man, but it wasn't him. And as it passed each house, the windows rattled and the birds scattered, fleeing from something none of them could see but all of them could feel. The dark man, their fearless legend, had been replaced. And what had come back was far worse.